It's definitely not.
Last time you saw me was in San Francisco and you were doing some Irish stuff there. And he was in Berkeley for a while and then something actually then.
I still love great. I need to kick off. I was going to serving an important function, which is better than the alternative.
So far.
It is.
My grandma lives in Berkeley.
This one I don't hear.
Because they responded so well.
How did your meeting go last night? I heard you out for a second.
Oh, it went really well. It went really well.
Lemonade.
Ooh, what are these cool things?
So I got a pour. Okay, that's good enough. Okay, let me see.
It's like a creamer.
Serious.
Yeah, that's right. Because my brain will keep stalling until I have put together a big picture. And then Sunny aggressive web app and a hybrid web app versus an app. And I was like, wow.
Why won't my hand stop shaking when all the earth is still? When ancient ghosts are waking, so many steps need taking, so many plans need making. I think I will. I think I will. Morning glow, starts to shimmer when you know winds of change are set to blow and sweep this whole land through. Morning glow is long past due. The anthropologist Jeremy Narby spoke about the shamans in Peru, the ayahuasqueros, who once their initiate had taken ayahuasca, needed to be sung into the next dimension. The singing is what vibrated the portals open. The singing is what let the earth know that we were ready to receive its riches. As we don't seem to have a shaman on staff here at Hume, sadly, I went for the next best bet, which was the Great American Musical Theater, Pippin, 1970s. Because we've got magic to do. Now, exactly what space are we talking about opening? If we were to map it on the body, it'd be from here to here, below the head, from the belly, through the heart, this space. Donna Haraway at University of Santa Cruz, a professor of consciousness, came out with a recent book called Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Thulacene. So she talks a lot about the thonic space, a fancy word for underground or underworld. She also talks about the Thulacene. Excuse me, I have some horchata that's in my throat chakra, and I'm serious. And my water, it dispelled.
I'm going to get you some.
Thank you. The Thulacene is a compound of two Latin roots. It's thonic, underground, but also kainos, which means now, the present, So she talks about the Thulacene, not the Anthropocene, which is how humans run things, or not the Capitalocene, how capital and assets run things, but this necessary space, this necessary middle space of Thulacene, of being of ground. Thank you, Susan. She also gets very much into things very snaky. Things that are jiggly and wiggly and wriggle their bellies in the mud. Have multiple tentacles, or hybrid. What would it look like to look at things from this space, this perspective from the ground up? Karina Gould, a longtime Ohlone activist in the East Bay, talks about how Ohlone people would visit from one community to another by setting signal fires. So the idea is that you would come to the new territory, but you would stop at the boundary, and you would light a fire, a signal. The people in the community see the fire and know what's up. They'd send a party out to come collect you, bring you in. And at that moment, what would happen? Not a power handshake, not a syncing of emails, not a status, who's higher in the pecking order kind of encounter, but a hosting food protocol. You were fed. You weren't asked who you were. You weren't asked what your status was. You weren't asked what you were doing there. You were simply brought in H2H, human to human, because that kind of protocol was set to manage the gathering, was set to open up people to encounter each other as humans, not as enemies, not as allies. This is the kind of thing that we're hoping to do with this gathering here. The food hosting protocol first. The running out for seconds while I was trying to come in. The immediate exit of my partner as I walked in to start to talk.
My bad.
But in fact, these are all the things of the rich, messy, fertile living that Haraway is talking about, that I'm going to argue is capped, is buried by the protocol of status, of rights and wrongs, of non-mess, of cleanliness. Mm-hmm. And another thing that's messy is that at 52, I can't read very well without my glasses, and I don't think I brought them with me, which is kind of messy and kind of fun, but we'll see how that goes. Thank you, again. Yeah, so I wanted to talk to you about my research. My project is visions and social justice, or visions and alternative epistemologies, or a fancy word for vision and other ways of knowing things. My questions are this: what kinds of ways of knowing are out there for humans to use, particularly in this troubled time? Haraway writes we need to stay with the trouble, and I agree. The earth is this middle space right now of trouble, and we need to stay with it. But how? What are the kinds of ways that we can do as humans that are different from what we've done before? How about the intuitive? How about the felt sensation? How about the known in body? How about the seen, the insight, in vision? All things internal, as opposed to what's external, what's quantifiable, what's classifiable, what's reproducible, what's measurable, what's rational. It's not too eviscerate that other way of knowing. It's just to recognize, I think, that it's limited. And that in our time right now, we need to be thinking differently and feeling differently and starting to approach other ways of knowing. So in my project, I started out looking at one of the most important spiritual writings of the 20th century, Black Elk Speaks, Black Elk Lakota Sioux, who when he was 9 fell into a fever dream of 14 days and got to see the entire swale of history go before him. He was able to see his people, their future, and the people who were non-indigenous as well, the white settlers, who are now part of that whole mix. He got to see their path too, because it was integrated. I need my glasses again. My work, though, has taken me to the Northwest and back down the coast. Kind of as we understand now, people came to the Americas first, down the coast. Back to this magnet, here, the Bay Area. Because I didn't need to go looking elsewhere. I could stay in my own backyard to see what was happening here in terms of different ways of knowing. Today, I want to share with you our exploration of protocols together. The actual doing of new ways of gathering to see what happens when we invite people in for food first. What happens when we do a singing to open the space? What happens when we listen to different stories, different perspectives? So now, I'm able to do this part of the protocol, the greeting, which I've been holding off until now. And that was the screen I forgot to click. Singing the portal open. Io sono Kevin DiPirro. Sono dei genitori italici e celtici. Negli Abruzzi, nelle montagne, però prima e avanti in Grecia. Pyrrhus, Epirus. My name is Kevin DiPirro, and my tribes are Italic and Celtic. On my father's side, I'm from the Abruzzi region, but before that, my people migrated from Greece. Who my progenitor may be is up for question. It could be the guy on the left, who is your basic general leader, Pyrrhus, who took over in the vacuum of power created by Alexander the Great's death at 33. Or this guy on the left, who looks a lot like me. And his name is Pyrrho. So DiPirro is of Pyrrho. He's a philosopher, the first skeptic. And not skeptic in terms of, I find it hard for you to convince me of things, but skeptic in terms of truth is ineffable. Truth can't be pinned down precisely. Therefore, we must come up with alternative ways of accessing the closest we can get to that truth. Knowing it's dynamic and revolving, that's who I choose to be my progenitor. Tame Quivin, is a mochmich o limerick, is meracionach me, is muntoij agus elantoij me. My name's Kevin, which means gentle in Irish. On my mother's side, her family comes from Bruff in County Limerick on the Morning Star River. I'm a teacher and I'm an artist. Who am I? Where am I? What are the stories of this place? These are the questions that Alice Walker asked in Memorial Church in the fall, and it greatly impacted my research. I'd been looking elsewhere for spiritual underpinnings, for alternative epistemologies, because those were known. But when she asked this question, I was forced to contemplate that my identity could actually have to do with where I was living. Not where I came from, not this trace back to Greece or to the southern part of Ireland, but right here. What was here in this place, she was asking. What drew me? Why am I here? So my project picked up one more piece then in starting to ask what the stories are of this place, this Bay Area. And it was the cosmic serpent. Cosmic serpent, it turns out, and it was signified from Jeremy Narby's work, is one of the most ubiquitous trans-global, transcultural symbols that we have. This figure, this cosmic serpent, exists in Aboriginal dream time. It comes up from a billabong, the water, onto the earth in the desert as the rainbow serpent. It exists in Persia. It exists in Europe. It exists in India, in Southeast Asia. It exists among the Inuit. It exists down in South America. You can see here it exists in Egypt. Do you see the great cosmic serpent circling? Here's a rainbow serpent from Australia. And this one is really interesting. It's the twin serpent. Some of you may know about Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Well, Narby's work shows that it's not just feather and serpent, it's also precious twin. Quetzal doubles as feather and twin. And this twin serpent is everywhere. So I started asking myself, where is the cosmic serpent in the Bay Area? If it exists in all these cultures, why isn't it present here? Is it buried? Is it underground? How do we coax it out? Am I just not seeing it because I don't know how to see and I don't have ayahuasca? But I can see. So, I'd like to share with you for the rest of the time tonight some of my findings. I want to show you some of the stories that speak to this question in particular. I want to walk you through an account of Jeremy Narby's taking ayahuasca, Clarissa Pinkola Estes' Skeleton Woman, which is not straight up a serpent story, but I think when we look at it, we'll see a lot of connections to it. There's also an Ohlone story that I found called The Snake that lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And lastly, I want to show you some pictures of an installation project I did at Point Reyes National Seashore, inspired by this work, and some poems that came up that were also inspired by this. Lastly, I'm going to finish by walking you through where this project is going next, because it does have a lot of life to it, at least 2 more versions. And I'm happy to show you how we're gearing up for that and what we're planning for. Oops, Daisy. She's proving my messy point. Thank you. Okay, so to begin, I'm going to open my snake box. Shall we open it and see what's inside? Thank you. Here's Donna Haraway, staying with the trouble, making kin in a thylacine. And here's my awesome new glasses. I want to read you a little bit from Haraway to begin because she's a fierce writer. Prescription's slightly different from mine. Sonic ones are beings of the earth, both ancient and up to date, I imagine thonic ones as replete with tentacles, feelers, digots, cords, whiptails, spider legs, and very unruly hair. Thonic ones romp in multi-critter hummus, but have no truck with sky-gazing homo. Thonic ones are monsters in the best sense. They demonstrate and perform the material meaningfulness of earth processes and critters. They also demonstrate and perform consequences. Thonic ones are not safe. They have no truck with ideologues. They belong to no one. They writhe and luxuriate in manifold forms and manifold names in all the airs, waters, and places of earth. They make and unmake. They are made and unmade. They are who are. No wonder the world's great monotheisms, in both religious and secular guises, have tried again and again to exterminate the chthonic ones. The scandals of times called the Anthropocene and the Capitalocene are the latest and most dangerous of these exterminating forces. Living with and dying with each other potently in the Thulacene can be a fierce reply to the dictates of both Anthropos and Capital. Oh yeah, and note the artwork. Right, there's the pelvis. There's the spine. There's like the sea creature flippers. And look, there's no head. It's a butterfly. It's a different way of knowing. Okay, so Jeremy Norby. Talking about seeing from a different space. I didn't think I'd be experientially doing this for you. But I guess that's what the mess is all about. The first time an Ashaninka man told me he had learned the medical properties of plants, oh, you have to look to the bottom, by drinking a hallucinogenic brew, I thought he was joking. We were in the forest, squatting next to a bush whose leaves he claimed could cure the bite of a deadly snake. One learns these things by drinking ayahuasca, he said. But he wasn't smiling. During my research on Ashaninka ecology, people in Kirishari regularly mention the hallucinatory world of ayahuasqueros, or shamans. In conversation about plants, animals, land, or the forest, they would refer to ayahuasqueros as a source of knowledge. Each time I would ask myself what they really meant when they said this. He was a good little anthropologist in training. In fact, he was here at Stanford in anthropology and went down to do his field work and realized it was bogus, that it was asking him to describe irrational processes of knowing by rational means. And he realized by meeting the people there, by the encounter, by the hosting, that he was the one that had to change his mind if he wanted to understand where they were coming from, instead of forcing it into his own system. So here's what he did. He took ayahuasca. And here's his experience, if I can see it. God, I look like my dad. It's all happening. Origins are happening right in front of us. Damn. I didn't think it'd be so literal. His shaman is called Ruperto. First, Ruperto sprayed us with perfumed water, agua florida, and tobacco smoke. Then he sat down and started to whistle, a strikingly beautiful melody. I began seeing kaleidoscopic images behind my closed eyes, but I was not feeling well. Ruperto started whistling again. Images started pouring into my head. In my notes, I described them as unusual or scary. A forest rodent with bared teeth and a bloody mouth. Brilliant, shiny, multicolored snakes. A policeman giving me problems, my father looking worried. Deep hallucination submerged me. I suddenly found myself surrounded by two gigantic boa constrictors that seemed 50 feet long. I was terrified. These enormous snakes are there. My eyes are closed, and I see a spectacular world of brilliant lights. And in the middle of these hazy thoughts, the snakes start talking to me without words. They explain that I am just a human being. I feel my mind crack, and in the fissures, I see the bottomless arrogance of my presuppositions. It is profoundly true that I am just a human being most of the time. I have the impression of understanding everything, whereas here I find myself in a more powerful reality that I do not understand at all, and that in my arrogance I did not even suspect existed. I feel like crying in view of the enormity of these revelations. Then it dawns on me that this self-pity is part of my arrogance. I feel ashamed that I no longer dare feel ashamed. Nevertheless, I have to throw up again. So, and you can hear in that, right? You can hear the courage to cross over, to surrender to something different, greater than oneself. You hear the fear in that, but you also hear his dropping into himself. You feel him dropping into his humanity. A lot of the imagery with the cosmic serpent is about devouring. It's about surrender. It's about letting go. It's about transformation. It's about shedding skins. It's about being swallowed whole, like the opening of The Little Prince, that boa constrictor swallowing that elephant, and he draws a picture of it, and the adults think it's a hat, but he knows it's a boa constrictor swallowing an elephant. Next, I want to move to a local story from the Ohlone. These were stories collected by Linda Yamanane. And she was lucky because she had access to folks who were pretty old. But she was able to collect their stories and get them published in a local press. This is called The Snake That Lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains, an Awashawas Ohlone story. And just a quick note, of the Ohlone, we understand there to be 8 different groups. But it's a bit of a misnomer because we don't really know what the people were called. Ohlone is a linguistic term, and it talks about the language community that they were part of. So all the 8 that we know are really linguistic terms. That seems sad to me. That seems part of that burial underground. Real quick too, according to Corinna Gould, the Bay Area was dotted with shell mounds, 463 to be exact. These were sometimes the size of 3 stories and 3 football fields wide, particularly in Emeryville. So we're talking pyramids. We're talking giant structures, 463. They used to be here in the Bay Area. Well, they're still here. The Emeryville one is underneath a parking lot that houses the Apple Store and Victoria's Secret. So, where is the cosmic serpent? Is here. Is here. It might be buried. It might need activation. As Black Elk's medicine man told him, when you see a vision, it's a gift, but you have to activate that power by retelling it, by performing it. Long ago, there was a snake that lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It came out of the sea and would come up into the mountains, up into its favorite redwood tree. It had that tree smooth from climbing up and down so much looking for people. It used to climb up there and look around spying. And when it saw the Santa Cruz Indian people all gathered together harvesting seeds or acorns or something, it would give a loud whistle and down it would come, dragging itself as quick as a devil to where they were. That snake would surround them all in a loop and squeeze them and eat them up. He didn't eat people a few at a time. No! He waited till he could get them all in a big bunch. Kind of like some of you out there I was watching with the tamales. That snake was around there for so many years killing people, and they couldn't seem to do anything to stop it. But the Indians were smart, as you'll see, and they got to thinking how they might kill that snake. The women got busy making baskets big enough to cover a hole in the ground. The men started cutting down trees and clearing the ground. And when the ground was cleared and smooth, the men dug holes in the ground they could get into to hide. When the women had finished the baskets and the men had finished preparing the ground, some of the men went and each stood near a hole and placed a basket beside it. Others went to hide in nearby woods. The men stood there, each beside a hole in the ground, so the snake would see them. Well, sure enough, that snake came and climbed up its favorite redwood tree. And when he saw all the people, he gave a whistle and came down, lickety-split, to eat them up. The men who were standing by the holes had their weapons, and those who were hiding in the woods had theirs. When the snake came and surrounded them, the men who were by the holes jumped in and covered themselves with the baskets. The snake was angry. He thrashed about and crushed all the baskets to pieces. Then the men who were in the woods came jumping out with their bows and knives and attacked that snake. Those who were inside the holes were also stabbing it from below. That snake was so angry. Oh, it was mean. Whenever it opened its mouth, some men threw handfuls of strong tobacco in the snake's mouth. It was quite a fight, but they finally killed the snake. Then all the Indian people came around to look at it. They were afraid the snake might resuscitate, might come back to life. So just to be sure, they cut that snake up into little pieces and ate it. Ever since then, we've never had to worry about that snake in the Santa Cruz Mountains again. So there's so much in there, and you're already hearing the resonances of the other stories that I've told and the ways I've talked about it. Let me point out a couple that seem important to me. It comes out of the sea and into a tree. So water, the place of beginnings, and into the tree of life. Or as Estes would call it, the tree of life, death. Death. This snake kills, it swallows, it devours. But look at the interesting turn in the story where they become the ones who devour it. This is a classic mythic trope. I studied this in Celtic stories, 8th to 12th century, in my grad school at Cal. And you would see this a lot, where people would ingest the thing that was supposed to ingest them, and thereby become part with it. And that's what I think is happening here. Also, notice how they go and hide in the ground, right? They go in the chthonic space. And lastly, this notion of resurrection. The cosmic serpent is known for creating the universe, for creating the world, for creating the earth, for creating life, but also for recreating life. Because sometimes humans fuck it up. And you put a flood down and wash everybody out, and then you restart again. So recreation is an important part of the cosmic serpent's mythology. Here you have these people becoming snake. Becoming snake. In resurrecting that way. Okay. Next I want to move to an Inuit tale called Skeleton Woman. It's collected by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with Wolves, among other things. Continue to listen for the motifs that are showing up. Skeleton woman. She had done something of which her father disapproved, although no one any longer remembered what it was. But her father had dragged her to the cliffs and thrown her over and into the sea. There the fish ate her flesh away and plucked out her eyes. As she lay under the sea, her skeleton turned over and over in the currents. One day a fisherman came fishing. Well, in truth, many came to this bay once, but the fisherman had drifted far from his home place and did not know that local fishermen stayed away. This inlet was haunted. The fisherman's hook drifted down through the water and caught, of all places, in the bones of the skeleton woman's rib cage. The fisherman thought, oh, now I've got a really big one. Now I really have one. In his mind, he was thinking how many people he could feed, how long it would last, and how long he might be free from the chore of hunting. And as he struggled with the great weight on the end of the hook, the sea was stirred to a thrashing froth, and his kayak buckled and shook. For she who was beneath struggled to disentangle herself. The more she struggled, the more she tangled in the line. And the more she struggled, the more she tangled additionally. No matter what she did, she was inexorably dragged upward, tugged up by the bones of her own ribs. The hunter had turned to scoop up his net, so he did not see her bald head rise above the waves. He did not see the little coral creatures glinting in the orbs of her skull. He did not see the crustaceans on her old ivory teeth. When he turned back with his net, her entire body, such as it was, had come to the surface and was hanging from the tip of his kayak by her long front teeth. "Ah!" cried the man, and his heart fell into his knees. His eyes hid in terror on the back of his head, and his ears blazed bright red. Just so you know, that's exactly what happens to the hero in the Irish cycle, Cuchulainn. Those three things happen, precisely. "Ah!" he screamed, and he knocked off her prow with his oar and began paddling like a demon towards shoreline. And not realizing that she was tangled in his line, he was frightened all the more, for she appeared to stand up her toes while chasing him all the way to shore. No matter which way he zigged his kayak, she stayed right behind, and her breath rolled over the water in clouds of steam, and her arms flailed out as though to snatch him down into the depths. "No!" he wailed as he ran aground. In one leap, he was out of his kayak, clutching his fishing stick and running, and the coral-white corpse of skeleton woman still snagged in the fishing line, bumpity-bump behind right after him. Over the rocks he ran, and she followed. Over the frozen tundra he ran, and she kept right up. Over the meat laid out to dry he ran, cracking it to pieces so his mucklucks bore down. Throughout it all, she kept right up. In fact, grabbed some of the frozen fish as she was dragged behind. This she began to eat, for she had not gorged in a long, long time. Finally, the man reached his snow house and dove right into the tunnel, and on hands and knees scrabbled his way into the interior. Panting and sobbing, he lay there in the dark, his heart a drum, a mighty drum. Safe at last. Oh, safe at last. Thank God Almighty, he's safe at last. Imagine, when he lit his whale oil lamp, there it lay, in a tumble upon his snow floor. One heel over her shoulder, one knee in her rib cage, one foot over her elbow. He could not say later what it was. Perhaps the firelight softened her features, or the fact that he was a lonely man. But a feeling of some kindness came into his breathing, and slowly he reached out his grimy hands, and using words softly like mother to child, began to untangle her from the fishing line. Oh, now, now, now. First he untangled the toes, then the ankles. oh na na, oh na na. On and on he worked into the night, and until dressing her in furs to keep her warm, Skeleton Woman's bones were all in the order a human should be. He felt into his leather cuffs for his flint and used some of his hair to light a little more fire. He gazed at her from time to time as he oiled the precious wood of his fishing stick and rewound the gut line, and she in the furs uttered not a word. She did not dare, lest his hunter take her out and throw her down to the rocks and break her bones to pieces utterly. The man became drowsy, slid under his sleeping skin, and soon was dreaming. Sometimes, as humans sleep, a tear escapes from the dreamer's eye. We never know what sort of dream causes this, but we know it's either a dream of sadness or longing. And this is what happened to the man. The Skeleton Woman saw the tear glisten in the firelight, and she became suddenly so thirsty. She tinkled and clanked and crawled over to the sleeping man and put her mouth to his tear. The single tear was like a river, and she drank and drank and drank until her many years-long thirst was slaked. While lying beside him, she reached inside the sleeping man and took out his heart, the mighty drum. She sat up and banged on both sides of it. Bum, 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 bum. And as she drummed, she began to sing. Out, flesh, 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 flesh. And the more she sang, the more her body filled out with flesh. She sang for hair. She sang for good eyes and nice fat hands. She sang the divide between her legs and breasts long enough to wrap for warmth and all the things a woman needs. And when she was all done, she also sang the sleeping man's clothes off and crept into bed with him, skin against skin. She returned the gray drum to his heart, to his body. And that is how they awakened, wrapped one around the other, tangled from their night, in another way now, in a good and lasting way. The people who cannot remember how she came to her first ill fortune say she and the fisherman went away and were consistently well fed by the creatures she had known in her life underwater. The people say that it is true, and that is all they know. Okay, I'm going to leave off, let that story just speak for itself. And then I want to shift gears a little bit and walk you through the installation project that I did up in Point Reyes, share a couple poems with you, and then we'll wrap up talking about where this project's going next. If people want to stand up for a second and just kind of stretch out their bodies and all that good stuff, please do so. Okay, so I'm going to do this part a little bit quickly. Make sure we get out on time. So, in November, I went up to Point Reyes. I visited for inspiration a reconstructed Miwok coast village called Kuliloklo. And I walked over to the indigenous medicine garden and saw that someone, probably a park ranger, had started to rake the leaves of the tree in the indigenous garden. And that the pile that whoever had raked had made looked just like a red serpent crawling out from the tree of life. So incredibly inspired, I picked up the rake and I finished the job. And I made multiple sets of snakes in accordance with what I'd seen in the exhibit at the De Young Museum the day before. The exhibit at the De Young was Teotihuacan, which has as one of its central features the feathered serpent. There's a pyramid of the feathered serpent, there's an underground passage of this feathered serpent, and there's a series of mosaics and artwork that resemble those red snakes precisely. So here's the work that I did to contribute to the raking up of what had begun as raking leaves from the garden. There, as you can see, is a spiral maze. Here's me. And here's the exhibit. And there are the serpents. You can see, if you look carefully, that the snakes are above a series of trees of life and death. Here's the head that comes out of the pyramid of the feathered serpent. Here's the underground snake tunnel, phonic, that leads underground the pyramid of the feathered serpent. So, in my imagining, the shell mounds that are buried here have a connection with the pyramids that were in Teotihuacan, and that an act of raking, an act of labor or work, an act of contributing to the work that was going on might be a way to reactivate or to revision, to see what may be up here buried. It also prompted a series of poems, 20 that I wrote, and I will share a couple with you now. Leaf fall is no small thing. Out here where I live in sunny California, it's not so much a thing. But in the East, where I was born, each fall the leaves would run their range of dying colors, extinguished brilliantly, finally, as red, and carpet the paths, the yard where I would take up my rake, and move them to piles that we could sift, fall in, run through, never as soft as we had hoped. To dive into a leaf pile, the sudden hard hit of ground would always surprise me. Let's get in both doors. Thank you. I can handle a rake. I can clear a path. I can move a large pile from one side to the other in a yard, say, but the long, uncontained expanse of field is something else altogether. Straight back knot. When I lean down, bend forward, I always mean to be spineful, but often fail. My spine moves, sinuous, like a large snake, not because I'm holy or a cosmic giver of life, but because I don't have a mirror. I can't see my back undulate as such. I've learned using a mirror, if I stick my butt out, if I stick my butt back, it makes me flat, vulnerable, and yes, spineful. Bowl of sauce. What a thing. From the low-slung earth of a family sweat lodge into bright gray light, into mist and smell of bay leaves to emerge. It's like somehow I've awoken in a bowl of pasta sauce. And I've got two more, a little bit longer, a little bit darker. My car is banged up, and so am I. It took a hit running straight into the back of a hipster grad student from Stanford in a Mini Cooper who himself had run into a giant company SUV Lexus driven by a giant long-legged woman in high heels and corporate outfit who was on the phone, quick as a wink to let them know that the poet had careened into everyone, leaving his little Corolla banged, bent, dented. I said I was banged, bent, dented as well to the policeman who wasn't listening. He was looking at my phone intently on the passenger seat and knowing what to write in his report about how I was to blame. And I am. When I was young and foolish, I jumped off a 100-foot cliff near the island of Gozo, the so-called Azure Window, where Daenerys got married. But equally important, I came to in the cave, where Odysseus spent 10 years with Calypso in loving embrace. When I jumped, I didn't earn 10 years of loving, but 2 beefy Australians who went around the Mediterranean jumping off anything they could find and scuba diving to the bottom of clear waters. I leapt with them on the count of 3 and hit 100 feet later, going 35 miles an hour. I hit my spine as if returning too sudden to a hard Ithacan throne. There's an area below the last bit of tailbone called the caudus equinus, a Latin term that means horse's mane, because the nerve endings swirl out as if snorting and shaking, all snaky. An opening like the anus derives its perceptiveness from this horse's mane. I still derive a deep sexual satisfaction, a relief really, from fingering mine with arnica or gold bond with lidocaine, or witch hazel, or shark liver, or lately CBD. I suspect it is fingering my deep pain, housed in my body, snake in the bathwater, coiled in the warm sponge caress of Iphigenia's mother, spilling out from a broken sacrum, pooling out, really, warm and sticky, from the temple of mother love, where the young boy crawled along the path toward loving, only to find, dumbstruck by a thunder jolt, that in that particular moment, he was not really wanted. Furious and fate, the fall, the felling of the low beast by curving a sacrificial sigh across the neck, he fell. He fell. Slowly, slowly toward the ground he fell. His hit would resonate in the underworld of forever for him. Okay, and before I read the last one, I want to show you the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. I was 10 when my father took me to the top. I was terrified. While I was raking the leaves into the serpent shapes, I was inspired to write this poem for my father. It's called One Thing I Learned from My Father. My father's at the end of his life. He's come to that transition place that Estes is talking about. The life-death-life cycle that we've been talking about with the cosmic serpent. In yoga, you have the 2 twins, and one is venom, and the other is life, because the 2 are inseparable. One thing I learned from my father was the value of hard work, physical labor, raking, chopping, mowing, sweeping, using the arms, the back, the belly, the muscles sore, breath coming hard, made you alive, made sure you were not dead, but living. No exercise on a treadmill, but good, honest, useful work. The raking of leaves into a pile, a red leaf serpent. It slithers out from the maze of my childhood today, coils in my belly, underneath the Avenida de los Muertos, breathing in feathered death, breathing out mud-shaped life, aware of all the time of its place in things. My dad and I stand atop El Templo del Sol, completely oblivious of all that. He is dying now. That much is clear. But back then, he just held my boy's hand atop the sheer stone as I struggled with my breath and my fear, gaping down the Avenida toward an eternity I did not understand. So those are some of the poems that got inspired by this question: who am I? Where am I? What are the stories of this place? And what I'm finding in my work is that the stories are all around. And you encounter them all over if you're open, and then the stories come from you. And it's that belief that's driving this project, that all of us are those storytellers, are those poets, are those speakers. And so, in the next step of this project, we've just found out that we have the Nightery space to run a series of 2 weeks performances. The idea is to create a space that resembles the human body, that resembles the pelvis and the spine and the sacrum and the spinal column. At the end, instead of a head, is a tree of life and death. And that we'll have 2 cosmic serpents, gigantic, encircling this sculpture. It'll be an immersive piece, meaning that you walk into the work. You walk into yourself. No head. And there you get to hear stories that we'll collect from the team right here. Mylan and Bobby and Mitzi, that are from this space, that are the stories that are of this place. Because as Haraway also asks, we need to develop that skill to destabilize our own stories. And I would add, to destabilize our own stories of ourselves by retelling them alongside other stories, and vice versa. So that's what we're going to create, is a space to observe protocol, to have food, to come in not from status, but from humanity, and to walk into yourself, and to feel, to hear, to interact, to be immersed in this space of inside yourself that we're pulling outside, to be part of this underworld, to activate it, to make it real. Here are some of the images, and then we'll be closing out. So we're going to be applying to be in the Stanford Art Gallery for April of next year. And when we do, here's what we want to transform the Stanford Art Gallery into. So, where is the cosmic serpent in the Bay Area? Some early sightings. Where I live in Pacifica, the Aramai Ohlone have a walk called the Shumsha Trail, which means rainbow snake. It's a San Francisco garter snake. beach, on another walk in San Pedro Valley, if you can see it, I see a giant serpent head stone coming out. And it's by a place of water. And I go there and be still. And there's a giant mountain behind it. And I know it sounds like Jung's active imagination, of which I have plenty. But that's how they found the pyramids in Mexico too. They were all buried over trees and mounds. So I'm still curious. There's a spiral maze on one of the mountains, Point Mori, on top of Lashumsha Trail, where I live in Pacifica. It looks out to the water. I haven't seen Skeleton Woman, but it's possible. There's a whale, my daughter Simone, at Half Moon Bay. There is Quetzalcoatl, an art piece in Half Moon Bay on the beach. You see the kelp, the serpent head, and the seagull feathers. And here, City College, is Diego Rivera's largest mural. And in the far left quadrant is the rainbow serpent. And it's coming from the two temples at Teotihuacan and Tenochtitlan, which was Mexico City. So Rivera knew in 1943 that the rainbow serpent was right here. And that the mix of genius of plasticity from South America would mingle with the genius of mechanics from the whites in Northern America. I'm still not too psyched about the mechanical part, but okay. Any yoga place you go, you'll be experiencing the cosmic serpents. Here are the two nadi I was telling you about that go up the chakras. The Pingala and the Ida. And one of the wonderful things about this conceptual thinking is that it's a way to have both and, as opposed to binary either or. Because these two serpents are different, yet they intersect at key places. And I think that's a really wonderful epistemological conceptual formation to think about how to manage difference, and how to think about unity. That's the cauda equina, a prop. That's the real sacrum. And then she has created this ribboned, feathered equina out the bottom. There's been sightings at STS office space of a serpent box, and you can even see there's a half-eaten apple. Dropping that tree of knowledge stuff right there. Here's work in the classroom is where the rainbow serpent is too. When we use it to talk about concepts, this is a training for TAs for STS1. And we're talking about how to blend rhetoric and writing, rhetoric and pedagogy, STS and technology, using these terms, using this kind of conceptual work, the intertwining. This is the elevator I take every day into the thonic space where I park my car at Robley. And there it is, right? It's called krasis. It's a Greek notion of healing, physicians. The serpent goes up the stick, but it's not a stick, it's the tree of life, obviously. Here's a Sesta poster. Two sides of the brain, which is also rendered as twin cosmic serpents, the two hemispheres of the brain, how they interact. And this one has gone ahead and done the rainbow coloring. There's a rainbow gecko that I purchased from Ross for $20 that's in my garden. Here's the rainbow serpent going to the tree at Christmas. Here's the two geckos, Curry and Aki, that my kids made me buy because I'm allergic to things with fur. And they're my two-headed serpents. Here's a rainbow, clay, artwork, sand painting from Navajo that exists in the San Francisco Library exhibit. There's my son, raking. One thing he learned from his father. So, I'd like to conclude, and first to thank you all for being here and being part of this. I'm very excited about this as a kickoff, and we have so much to do going forward. And I'm very excited that you came to be part of it. I'm going to sing you out as a way of closing, bringing down some of the in-depth experience we've had, and you can come back up to the surface. Again, this is from Pippin. There's my daughter, Simone, who plays the boy, the son. And she sings this song to end the piece, and she sings it a cappella. So, Simone, this is for you. Rivers belong where they can ramble. Eagles belong where they can fly. I've got to be where my spirit can be free. Gotta find my corner of the sky.